This is the Lattice website at lattice.com. The first thing I notice is that it's quite a visually dense website right from the start, and I'll talk more about these later. But as you go down, there's a lot to get stuck into, which can be a bad thing if you consider it to be too dense. But in this case, I think they strike a pretty good balance in terms of giving you things for your eyes to essentially explore and play with. So it's short, which is quite nice these days for a website, but it packs a lot in. The second thing that really jumps out at me is this animated green background. And I've seen this a fair number of times, but I quite like their approach here. It's generally subtle, but with these differences in brightness and darkness and this sort of gentle animation, they're adding a lot of visual interest to the website without distracting you too much from the content in the foreground. One thing I rarely see, which I quite like here, and we might see more in the future, I don't know, is this video background for a button. Normally buttons are quite static, or if they're not static, they have some sort of abstract background or animation. In this case, they're giving you a sense of what will happen when you click the button, because they're showing you a preview of the video that you're going to see once you click it. So that's quite a nice touch. This grid of features, let's call it, I quite like that it's part of the hero section. That's quite rare to see. Normally I'd see the hero section be its own self-contained area, and then as you scroll further down you'd get a grid of features, but it wouldn't be visible from the start. So this ties into the point about it being quite dense or quite packed with information. They're giving you that grid of features really early on, so you're immediately seeing what this product's offering. On that point, I quite like that this grid of features is staggered in this way. First of all, because it's just visually interesting to stagger columns like this, the start point, but it's also because it fits the shape of the content inside the hero quite well. So you can see here the top of performance, that's roughly the same distance from these buttons as the top of compensation is from the bottom of this text. And this goes further up again because it gets more space, roughly the same distance from these review scores. So the content here is staggered and the boxes here are staggered. I don't know which came first, the content being staggered or the boxes being staggered, but the fact that they fit together quite nicely, I like. I do wonder if they are a bit too close, since you might be distracted from the content here in the hero section, because you're immediately drawn down to these grid of features. But then again, maybe being drawn to this grid of features is not a bad thing. I've noticed that there's a green background consistently being used to highlight important information. So here there's a very obvious green background in the hero section, but they use green throughout the website. So they've used green for background colors here on these images. They use green as this border on the sort of subtitle or topic or tag for the section. You can see a subtle green background here behind these moving containers. And then down here for the final call to action, there's a very subtle green background. And again, that just hints at the fact that this deserves your attention a bit more than other parts of the website, which just use a white background. And on that topic, they really lean into green. I mean, some websites use various different hues. On this website, apart from a few counterexamples, pink here, purple here, they sort of stay in that cool color area, and it's mostly shades of green. And so that's nice because it feels more coherent since you're only using shades of the same hue, or maybe slightly different hues, but they're related to each other. So that adds coherence, but because they're all different from each other, it adds a lot of visual interest as well. So it's a nice mix between variety and coherence, and I think that's an easy one for anyone to use on their own websites. And one last thing I wanted to show you was an example under the performance subpage was this container. This is essentially a tabbed container. You can click on each of these at the top and change what this main container is showing. But these tabs don't look like tabs. They act a little bit like tabs. And once you click on them, they do look like tabs. They've got this sort of continuous container shape blending down into the main container. But I'm not really sure I've seen this before. I'm seeing this trend of these elements you click to change the main container getting more and more complex. I think this is the most complex I've seen them. And it's quite nice in the sense that you can fit more in. You can give people a sense of what that tab contains rather than just the text, for example, one-to-ones. You've got the image and then you've got the subtext here. And so even if someone doesn't click on one of these, they might get a sense of the other things that are offered in this product in terms of performance. So that's quite nice, and I think it works quite well just because it's sort of front and center. If you tried to fit too many of these into a website, maybe it would feel a bit overwhelming. But since this is really teaching you the ins and outs of the product, it feels like a nice use of a more complicated element. One last thing is that each tab is essentially given its own color scheme. So you can see here there's this light blue green, and that gets the light blue container. If I click on this, it's the purple and the purple, pink and the pink, yellow and the yellow, and the green and the green. That's quite a nice way of representing each section with a color and then following through in the main container.